Okay, so welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. We're tackling, grocery prices today,
Oh, yeah,
which seems to be top of mind, I think, for a lot of people.
for sure.
And, you all sent in some really interesting articles specifically focusing on all those promises that Trump made on the campaign trail
Right.
about bringing down the cost of, well, everything,
Yeah.
but groceries in particular.
hmm
And, it's kind of interesting because obviously we all feel it at the checkout.
Oh, for sure.
But, you know, Trump doesn't really have the best track record
Well, that's putting it lightly.
when it comes to always following through
Yeah.
on his promises.
That's one way to put it.
So that's kind of the mission for this deep dive,
Exactly.
is to really see, do these promises hold any weight? And to help us sort through all this, we have our expert.
Happy to be here.
So let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
One of the articles that you flagged was from Truthout, and they actually kind of pulled some quotes from Trump on the campaign trail. So like at a rally in August, he said, quote, "Prices will come down. You just watch. They'll come down, and they'll come down fast."
Wow. Bold statement.
Right. And then in September, he doubles down even more. He says, quote, "We will end inflation and make America affordable again, and we're going to get the prices down. Groceries, cars, everything. We're going to get the prices down."
It's interesting how he was, constantly blaming Biden, during the campaign
Oh, yeah.
and saying that they were responsible for these, sky-high prices.
Right.
But the Truthout article, along with some of the other sources that you sent,
Mm.
it kind of paints a more complicated picture.
Right. Like, what about that piece on Elizabeth Warren
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
going after all the big grocery chains?
Right. And she specifically called out Kroger,
Right.
for their profit margins, like almost doubling.
Almost like they were benefiting from it. Right.
Well, and that's where this idea of greedflation comes in,
Oh, yeah. I remember that article.
where, these companies are actually using, inflation as a cover to raise prices even more.
Right. And then what about that poll?
Oh, yeah.
84% of voters saying that they think corporate greed is like the main driver of all this.
Huge.
So maybe it's not so simple after all
No.
to just point the finger at one administration or another.
Yeah, there's a lot at play here.
Absolutely. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. After the election,
Okay.
Time magazine named Trump Person of the Year.
Right.
And, they asked him in this interview, are you still planning on lowering those grocery prices?
I'm curious how he answered that.
Well, his tone is definitely a little different.
Okay.
He says, quote, "I'd like to bring them down. It's hard to bring things down once they're up. It's
Right.
very hard."
That's quite a departure.
I know, a far cry from "they'll come down fast."
Sounds like reality might be setting in a little bit.
Right. And then Time, they ask him point blank,
Oh, boy.
"Would you consider your presidency a failure if you can't make good on these promises?"
Oh.
He says, quote, "I don't think so."
Interesting choice of words.
I know, right?
They-
Like almost setting us up for, some disappointment potentially.
Managing those expectations.
Right. So this brings up some really key questions for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Is this just him reassessing the situation?
Right.
Or is this a calculated move to kind of,
Soften the blow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about another piece of Trump's plan. And that's these massive tariffs that he's planning
Oh, right.
to slap on imports.
So that'll be interesting.
Yeah. And he's saying that they won't lead to higher prices for consumers.
Okay.
But then again, now that he's elected, we're seeing a little bit of a shift.
How so?
NBC News, they press him on this. They say, "Can you guarantee that families won't end up paying more?"
Mm-hmm.
He simply says, "I can't guarantee anything."
Not exactly reassuring.
I know.
Yeah.
And the Truthout article reminds us that those tariffs that he imposed during his first term actually did make prices go up,
Interesting.
despite his claims that they wouldn't.
It's like history repeating itself.
Right. And even like industry leaders are starting to worry now.
Like who?
Well, that CEO from Black & Decker, Donald Allen Jr., he straight up said, obviously coming out of the gate, there would be price increases associated with tariffs that we put into the market.
So even the people who are, selling the goods
Right.
are admitting that prices are going to go up.
Exactly. So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Yeah, that's the big question.
We're going to dive into that in just a second.
Sounds good. It's funny how Trump's whole stance on tariffs has like totally flipped since his first term.
Yeah, he was like all about them back then.
Yeah, he's like Mr. Tariff Man.
Totally. Saying they were going to protect American jobs and all that.
Right. But the Truthout article reminds us that, those tariffs didn't exactly work out the way he said they would.
Yeah, like prices still went up,
Mhm.
which makes me wonder, like, why are economists always so, like, hesitant about tariffs.
Well, tariffs are basically like a tax on imported goods, right? So they make those goods more expensive for us, the consumers.
Right. And
Yeah.
then, like you were saying earlier, those costs just get passed down the line.
Exactly. Like, let's say you're a big fan of fancy imported cheese.
Okay, I love cheese.
If there's a tariff on that cheese, the price at your local store is going to go up.
Right.
And then maybe you decide to just buy a cheaper kind of cheese instead.
Oh, yeah, a domestic one.
Right. So it can like totally change how people shop.
And affect the market for like American-made stuff, too.
Exactly. And that's just one example. Like tariffs can have all sorts of like unintended consequences.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like other countries could put tariffs on our stuff in retaliation,
Oh, that makes sense.
which would hurt American businesses, right?
Yeah.
They can also like mess up those global supply chains that we always hear about,
Right.
make it more expensive and harder to get stuff shipped here.
So it's like a super delicate balance, right?
Exactly.
Between protecting certain industries and like keeping prices stable.
Yeah, and making sure we don't start like a trade war.
Right.
And it's important to remember that like the impact of tariffs really depends on what specific goods or industries we're talking about.
Oh, okay.
Like some economists think that targeted tariffs can be good sometimes, while others think they're like almost always bad.
Oh. Okay, so it's not like a clear-cut thing.
Right, it's complicated.
There are a lot of nuances.
Exactly, and that's why it's super important for you, the listener, to really understand how complex this is and to think critically about, what could happen because of these policies.
Especially something as big as these tariffs. Yeah.
Exactly.
So thinking bigger, what are some other things that could affect grocery prices besides tariffs?
Well, like we talked about before, what companies do really matters. Like
Yeah.
if they keep putting profits over keeping prices low, then we can expect prices to just keep going up.
And what about all those supply chain problems we keep hearing about?
Oh, yeah, those are huge. The pandemic really showed us how fragile those supply chains are.
Right, remember the toilet paper shortage.
Exactly. And those disruptions totally messed up prices.
And it doesn't seem like those problems are going away anytime soon.
No, it's a really complicated issue. It's like everything from transportation and labor shortages to like global politics.
Like even if Trump wanted to fix everything,
Right.
there's only so much he can actually control.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to think critically and not just believe what politicians say without thinking about the bigger picture.
Right, because they don't have all the power to fix everything.
Exactly.
So with all that said, what can we, the listeners, actually do? Like, it feels kind of helpless watching these prices go up.
Yeah, I get that. But there are definitely things you can do. First of all, stay informed.
Okay.
Pay attention to the news and try to understand, what's making these prices change. The more you know, the better choices you can make.
I like that. Knowledge is power.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any, like, practical things people can do in their daily lives to, like, deal with these rising costs?
Totally. Like a lot of grocery stores have those loyalty programs that give you discounts and coupons.
Oh, right.
And there are websites and apps that show you where things are on sale and compare prices.
That's a good idea.
And don't forget about those government assistance programs we talked about earlier.
Like SNAP and food banks.
Right. They can be a huge help for families who are struggling to afford food.
It's important to remember those resources are there. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Definitely. It's about being proactive and taking control where you can. And remember, your community can also be a big help.
What do you mean?
Like farmers markets, community gardens, and food co-ops.
Right.
They can be a cheaper and more sustainable way to get groceries.
Never thought about that.
And you can even volunteer at a food bank or donate to organizations that are helping people who can't afford food.
So it's about finding ways to be creative and connecting with your community.
Exactly. And besides those things, it's super important to be involved in politics.
Right. We can't just expect things to magically get better on their own.
No, we have to hold our leaders accountable and fight for policies that actually address these problems.
So like contacting our representatives, supporting candidates who care about these issues, getting involved in local groups, all that stuff.
Exactly. There are so many ways to make your voice heard and push for change.
So even though it feels overwhelming, we're not totally powerless.
Right.
We can make smart choices, support things that align with our values, and use our voices to advocate for a better system.
You got it. It's about being proactive, engaged, and hopeful that we can make a better future together.
You know, it really feels like we're at a crossroads with all this.
Yeah,
Yeah, like on
get it.
one hand, we have, folks struggling to just buy groceries.
Right.
And then on the other hand, there's all these complicated, economic forces at play
Mm-hmm.
that feel impossible to understand, let alone actually do anything about.
I get it. It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It does. But, you were saying earlier that those, economic forces,
Yeah.
they're not just these like abstract things we can't control.
Yeah. Exactly.
They're actually shaped by decisions that people make.
Right. Like governments, businesses, even individuals.
So you're saying we're not just stuck, watching this happen. We can actually do something.
Absolutely. We have the power to make choices, advocate for change, hold people accountable.
Okay, that's actually pretty empowering.
Mm-hmm.
But like, where do we even start? If we want to tackle these rising grocery prices,
Mm.
in a way that actually makes a difference, what are some like concrete steps we can take?
Well, first off, like we've been talking about, stay informed, stay engaged.
Okay.
The more you understand about this stuff, the better choices you can make and the better you can advocate for real solutions.
So keep reading those articles you sent us, stay up on the news, have conversations about these issues.
Exactly. And beyond that, think about supporting those organizations that are fighting hunger, on the ground.
Like food banks, community gardens, local food co-ops.
Right. They're doing amazing work.
And donating our time or money to them can actually help people right in our communities.
Mm. Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of the choices you make every day.
Like what?
Supporting local farmers, buying sustainable products, cutting down on food waste, little things that add up to make a big difference.
So it's like making sure our actions line up with our values.
Right. And supporting those businesses that are trying to do things the right way.
I like that. And when it comes to like bigger changes, on a system level, we got to remember, we have a voice in politics.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we can contact our representatives, support candidates who actually care about these issues, get involved in local groups.
Right. It's all about using your voice and your vote to push for policies that create a better, more just food system.
Now, bringing it back to Trump and his promises,
Okay.
one of the articles you sent mentioned a pretty interesting idea that's been gaining some traction. It's about strengthening those antitrust laws.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
To kind of limit how much power these huge corporations have, especially in the grocery business.
Yeah. How would that work?
Well, basically, it would make it harder for just a few companies to control everything and set prices however they want.
Okay.
And that could lead to more competition, which in theory would bring prices down for everyone.
So it's about making sure everyone has a fair shot and that the system actually works for consumers and producers.
Exactly. And this goes back to that whole greedflation thing we talked about.
Right.
If you limit the power of these big companies, they can't just jack up prices whenever they feel like it.
Right. They're less likely to take advantage of the situation and just focus on profits.
Obviously, it's a complex issue and there's no easy fix. But, we need to be exploring these kinds of alternative solutions.
If we want a food system that's more resilient and sustainable and fair for everyone, absolutely.
Totally agree. And I think that's a key takeaway for everyone listening.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just accept things the way they are. Think critically, explore different solutions, and use your voice to push for real change. We've covered a ton today, from Trump's promises to those tricky tariffs to what companies are doing and those global supply chains. It's clear that this whole thing with rising food prices, it's complicated, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, no quick fixes, unfortunately.
But one thing's for sure, you, the listener, you're not helpless.
You have power.
By staying informed, making conscious choices, supporting those community initiatives, and getting involved in politics, you can help shape a better, fairer food system for all.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's about understanding the issues, taking action, and advocating for change.
And a little bit of hope never hurts.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another one.